It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Not mine exactly, but my son Mason's wedding. I had spent years imagining this day, standing proudly at the back of the hall, watching him start a new life with someone he loved. I'd pictured it 100 different ways. Maybe I'd cry a little, maybe I'd laugh a lot, maybe I'd just stand there and clap until my hands went numb. But nothing in all those daydreams prepared me for what I saw that afternoon. The ceremony was being held in a grand hotel ballroom downtown, the kind of place where the chandeliers sparkled like stars and the marble floors looked like they cost more than my old truck. I wasn't used to fancy places like that, but I wore my best black suit, the same one I had worn when Mason graduated college. I even got my boots polished, the scuff marks hidden so no one could say I hadn't tried. I stood there for a moment, breathing deep, telling myself I belonged here because I was Mason's father and that meant something. They led me to my seat at the front row, right where family was supposed to sit. There was a little folded card on the chair, just like all the others. At first, I didn't notice anything strange. I was too busy trying not to trip over the expensive carpet. But when I finally bent down to look, my heart stopped. The nameplate on my chair didn't say Mr. Daniel Cooper, like it should have. It didn't even say father of the groom. No, it said something else. Something that burned itself into my chest so hard I felt like I couldn't breathe. Low-educated fake dad. At first, I thought it was a mistake. A sick joke maybe. I glanced around, thinking someone would rush over, apologizing, swapping it out for the right card. But no one came. And then I heard it, the laughter. Quiet at first, like someone trying to hide it behind their hand, but it grew louder, crueler. When I lifted my eyes, I saw them, Claire's family, the Whitmores. Her mother, Judith, trying to cover her mouth as she laughed. Her father, Dr. Richard Whitmore, smirking like he had just seen a dog wearing a tuxedo. My ears burned. My palms started to sweat. I looked over at Mason, standing near the altar, straightening his cuffs. He hadn't seen it yet. Thank God he hadn't seen it yet. I stood up slowly. My first instinct was to leave. Get out of there before Mason noticed, before anyone else had a chance to point and laugh. My legs felt heavy, like they didn't want to move, but I forced them to step away from that awful little card. I made it halfway to the side door when I heard a voice, sharp and clear above the noise. Dad, wait. I stopped. I turned around, and there he was, Mason, jogging down the aisle toward me, the jacket of his navy blue suit flapping behind him. His face was red, not from embarrassment, but from anger. Real anger, the kind I hadn't seen on him since he was a teenager and someone tried to steal his bike. He reached me and grabbed my arm, squeezing tight. His voice shook a little when he said, Dad, let's go home. For a second, I just stared at him, too stunned to speak. I could feel every eye in the room on us, waiting to see what would happen next. But when I looked into Mason's face, into those familiar brown eyes that had once looked up at me from a crib, I knew what I had to do. I nodded. Together, we turned our backs on the ceremony, on the polished floors, the glittering chandeliers, the people who thought they were better than us. I could hear whispers and gasps behind us, but I didn't care. Mason didn't care either. His hand stayed firm on my shoulder, like he was shielding me from every daggered stare in the room. As we pushed through the heavy double doors, I caught a glimpse of Claire standing frozen at the altar, her white dress gleaming under the lights. Her mouth was open in shock. Judith's face was twisted into something ugly, and Dr. Whitmore looked like he had swallowed a lemon. Good. Let them see what it felt like to lose something precious. Outside, the sun was blinding. I blinked hard, trying to adjust. Mason walked a few steps ahead, his jaw clenched so tight I thought he might crack a tooth. We didn't say a word until we reached the parking lot. I fumbled with my keys for a second, hands still shaking, but Mason took them gently from me. I'll drive, Dad, he said. I got into the passenger seat like I was moving through water, heavy and slow. As Mason pulled out of the lot, I stared out the window, trying to gather my thoughts. I should have felt humiliated. I should have felt crushed. And part of me did. But there was another part, bigger and stronger, that felt something else entirely: pride. Mason could have ignored it. He could have let them laugh and carried on with his perfect little wedding. But he didn't. He chose me. He chose respect over appearances, loyalty over show. He chose love. We drove in silence for a long time, the city flashing by in blurs of glass and metal. My mind kept going back to that nameplate, the ugly black letters printed so neat and bold. Low-educated fake dad. That's how they saw me. Not as a man who had worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. Not as a father who had learned to braid hair with clumsy fingers when Mason wanted to dress up as a superhero with a cape. Not as the man who had sat up all night when Mason had pneumonia, praying to a god he wasn't even sure he believed in. No, just some fool they could laugh at. Mason tapped the steering wheel lightly with his fingers. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said finally, voice low. "I should have seen it coming. I should have known." "You couldn't have known," I said. My throat was thick, but I forced the words out. "And you stood by me. That's all that matters." He glanced over, and for the first time all day, he smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it was real. And it reminded me of all the other smiles over the years, the missing teeth grins, the sheepish teenage smirks, the proud graduation day beam. Smiles that belonged to the boy I had raised. We didn't go home right away. Instead, Mason pulled into the old diner on 4th Street, the one we used to go to after Little League games. It was nearly empty, just a few tired truckers and a waitress wiping down counters. We sat in a booth by the window. Mason ordered coffee. I ordered pie. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The world outside kept spinning. The Whitmores were probably scrambling to explain why the groom had abandoned the wedding. Maybe they were still laughing at me. Maybe they were cursing me. I didn't care. I had my son. I had the kind of love no degree could buy and no cruel words could tear down. For the first time that day, sitting in that old vinyl booth, I felt at peace. They could call me whatever they wanted. I knew who I was. I was his father, and that was enough. The drive home from the diner was quiet, but not heavy. There was a peace between us, the kind that only comes after the worst has happened and you realize you're still standing. As we pulled into the driveway of our little house on Maple Lane, I let out a breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. The porch light flickered as it always did. The paint on the fence was chipped, and the lawn could have used a trim. But to me, it was the most beautiful sight in the world. Mason got out first, unlocking the door like he had done 1,000 times growing up. I followed slowly, my legs stiff from sitting too long. Inside, the house smelled like old leather and coffee, comfort smells, familiar smells. Mason dropped the keys on the hallway table, shrugged off his jacket, and turned to me with a look I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't embarrassment. It wasn't anger. It was sadness, raw and deep. "I didn't mean for today to turn out like this," he said quietly. I shook my head. "You didn't do anything wrong." He sat down heavily on the old couch, the one we had patched together more times than I could count. I sat across from him in the recliner that had been my throne for nearly 2 decades. The same chair where I read Mason bedtime stories when he was little. The same chair where I waited up for him when he was 15 and stayed out past curfew. Memories flooded in, uninvited but welcome. I remembered the nights we spent on that couch when the power got cut off, wrapped in blankets, eating cold beans from a can and laughing like it was an adventure. I remembered how, when Mason was about 8, he'd swear he would grow up rich enough to buy me a real leather recliner. One that doesn't squeak when you lean back, he promised. I told him I liked the squeak. It reminded me the chair was alive, just like our home. I smiled at the memory, and for the first time that evening, I felt the weight on my chest lighten a little. Mason leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You ever think, maybe I should have just married someone simpler? Someone who didn't come with a family like that?" I let the question hang in the air. It wasn't my place to tell him who to love. Love wasn't about logic. It wasn't a checklist you could cross off neatly. It was messy, confusing, stubborn. I knew that better than most. Instead of answering right away, I stood up and wandered into the kitchen. I pulled 2 beers from the fridge, cheap ones, the kind we used to split on Saturday nights after working on the truck, and handed one to Mason. He accepted it with a small smile. "You loved her," I said finally, sinking back into my chair. "You don't get to choose where your heart goes. You just hope it's going somewhere good." Mason nodded slowly, staring at the floor. I thought Claire was different. I thought she loved me for who I was, not for how much I could impress her family. I took a sip of my beer. It was bitter, sharp, familiar. Maybe she did. But love isn't just words, son. It's actions. It's who stands beside you when everything falls apart. He looked up at me then, his eyes a little shinier than before. "You always stood by me. Always will." The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Somewhere outside, a dog barked and a car rumbled down the street. Life kept moving, even when your heart felt frozen in place. I thought back to the years that had led us here. All the moments that built the bond between us. Scraped knees and broken toys. Parent-teacher conferences where the teachers looked at me like I was a sideshow because I didn't use fancy words or wear pressed suits. Nights when Mason had the flu and I slept on the floor beside his bed, just to be close if he needed me. Days when I barely had 2 nickels to rub together, but Mason still had lunch money in his pocket. I wasn't perfect. I made mistakes, lost my temper sometimes, missed a few school plays when I couldn't get off my shift, but I never missed the big things. Birthdays, graduations, every moment that mattered. And no matter what anyone said about my education or my bank account, no one could ever take that away from me. You remember, I said, leaning back with a creak, the time you broke your arm playing backyard football? Mason chuckled. Yeah, I thought you were going to kill me. I thought you were going to kill me, I said, laughing. You screamed so loud the neighbor came running with a baseball bat, thinking we were getting robbed. Mason laughed harder, the tension easing from his shoulders. You carried me 2 blocks to the truck. I was heavy back then. You were heavier because you wouldn't stop crying. We both laughed, the sound filling the small room like sunlight breaking through a storm. For a little while, we weren't the father and son who had just walked out of a ruined wedding. We were just 2 stubborn souls, bruised but unbroken, clinging to the one thing that had never let us down, each other. Later that night, after Mason went to bed in his old room, I sat out on the porch with another beer, watching the stars blink overhead. The air was cool, the kind that hinted at fall just around the corner. I rocked slowly in the porch chair, listening to the night sounds, crickets, the distant hum of traffic, the creak of the old wood beneath me. I thought about Claire's parents, about all their money, their degrees, their polished words. None of it had taught them kindness. None of it had taught them respect. They had everything a man could want, except the one thing that mattered most, heart. And maybe, just maybe, the world had a funny way of balancing things out. I didn't know then what would happen next. I didn't know about the news that would break the following morning, or how the very people who had laughed at me would find themselves the laughingstock of the town. But in that moment, sitting on my porch with the night wrapped around me like an old blanket, I knew one thing for certain. I had already won. I had raised a good man. And no insult, no nameplate, no cruel laughter could ever take that victory away. I took a long sip from the bottle and tipped my head back, smiling up at the stars. Let the world think what it wanted. I knew the truth. And so did my son. There's a certain kind of fight that lives deep inside you when you're a man who's had to claw his way through life with nothing but bare hands and stubbornness. I never planned on being a single father. Nobody plans for something like that. Laura and I thought we had forever. She was the smart one between us, the one with dreams bigger than our little town could hold. When she got sick, it felt like the world tilted sideways, and no matter how hard I tried to straighten it, it never really went back. After she passed, it was just me and Mason. I was 24 years old with a mortgage I couldn't afford, a toddler who cried for his mother every night, and a hole in my chest so wide I didn't think anything would ever fill it. People whispered about me back then. I could hear them in the grocery store when they thought I wasn't listening. Poor kid, he doesn't have a chance. Daniel Cooper's gonna mess that boy up. He should just give the kid to Laura's parents. They've got money, education, a proper home. Laura's parents, the Holloways, didn't waste any time. 2 weeks after the funeral, they showed up on my doorstep with a lawyer and a custody petition. I still remember standing on that porch, Mason clinging to my jeans, staring down at Laura's mother with her perfect hair and her eyes sharp enough to cut glass. She looked at me like I was something she found stuck to the bottom of her shoe. Be reasonable, Daniel, she said, like she was offering me a deal and not trying to steal my whole world away. You can't possibly raise him alone. He needs better. I didn't say much. Never been the type for fancy speeches. I just told them no. Simple as that. They didn't listen. Took me to court 3 times. Tried to paint me as unfit because I never finished high school, because I worked with my hands, because my house was small and my wallet was even smaller. I'll never forget the feeling of sitting in that courtroom, wearing the only tie I owned, listening to their lawyer talk about me like I wasn't even human, like I was just some obstacle standing between them and what they wanted. They had charts and expert witnesses and photographs. I had calloused hands, bloodshot eyes, and the desperate love of a man who had lost everything except his boy. It should have been a slaughter. On paper, I didn't stand a chance. But sometimes, God sends you an angel in the ugliest battles. Her name was Julianne Price, court-appointed attorney, barely out of law school. She looked like she should still be taking exams, not fighting battles in front of a judge. But she fought for me like I was her own blood. She dragged every dirty trick the Holloways tried into the light. She showed the court what they really cared about: control, not love. The day the judge ruled in my favor, Mason was curled up on my lap, playing with my work boots. I didn't even hear the first part of the decision. All I heard was the part that mattered. Full custody granted to Mr. Daniel Cooper. I broke down right there in the courtroom. Couldn't help it. Ugly, choking sobs that I tried to swallow but couldn't. Julian just patted my back awkwardly and said, "You earned this. Don't let anyone tell you different." I didn't. From that day forward, Mason was mine to raise, mine to protect. Every scraped knee, every spelling test, every Christmas morning when there was barely enough under the tree, but somehow it was still magical, I gave it to him with everything I had. Sometimes, late at night when he was little, I'd sit by his bed and just watch him breathe. I was so scared I would screw it all up. That somehow love wouldn't be enough. That maybe the Holloways were right and I wasn't good enough. But every morning when Mason woke up and grinned at me with that gap-toothed smile, I told myself I could figure it out. And I did. Not perfectly. Not by any parenting book standards. But by the only one that mattered: showing up, staying, loving without limits. As he got older, the world didn't get any kinder. Teachers who looked down their noses when I showed up to conferences in my oil-stained boots. Other parents who invited Mason to birthday parties but not me to barbecues. It hurt sometimes, more than I wanted to admit. But Mason never cared. He'd come home from school talking about the kids whose parents had PhDs or corner offices, and I'd brace myself for the day he'd start to wish he had someone better for a father. But it never came. Instead, he'd say things like, "Dad, you're the smartest guy I know. You can fix anything." And he meant it. Not because I could solve algebra problems or negotiate business deals, but because he trusted that when he needed me, I'd always be there. When Mason turned 15, I sat him down and told him about the court battle. Told him how close I came to losing him. I thought he deserved to know. I expected anger maybe, or sadness. But he just sat there quietly, then hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. "You didn't lose me, Dad," he said. "You never will." Now, sitting on the porch all these years later, those words came back to me clear as a bell. After everything, the nameplate, the laughter, the humiliation, none of it could touch that bond. They didn't know the battles we had fought together. They didn't know the nights spent wrapped up in each other's stubborn love. They saw a low-educated mechanic. They didn't see the man who had rebuilt a whole world with 2 battered hands and a heart that refused to quit. I closed my eyes, letting the cool breeze wash over me. Mason was asleep inside, safe under the same roof that had sheltered him through scraped knees, broken hearts, and teenage rebellions. My boy, my pride, my proof that love didn't need a degree or a pedigree to be real. Tomorrow, the world would keep turning. Maybe it would bring more trouble. Maybe it would bring surprises. But tonight, in the quiet darkness of our little corner of the world, I knew this much. I had chosen to fight for Mason when it mattered most, and I would choose it again, 1,000 times over. Because at the end of it all, love wasn't measured in letters after your name. It was measured in the hands that picked you up when you fell. The arms that carried you home when you couldn't walk. The heart that never, not for a single moment, stopped believing you were worth it. And by that measure, I was the richest man alive. There's a certain pride that comes from building something with your own 2 hands, even when no one else sees it. Our life wasn't made of fine things, but it was real. Every crack in the wall, every squeaky step on the stairs, every mismatched plate in the kitchen cabinets, it all told a story. A story of surviving. Of laughing when there wasn't much to laugh about. Of building a life that was ours. After the custody battle, I was working 2 jobs, days at the factory, nights fixing trucks in the neighbor's garage. Sometimes I'd crawl into bed at 2 in the morning, too tired to even take my boots off. But when Mason would wander into my room in his footy pajamas and climb onto the bed, curling up against me with a sleepy, "Love you, Dad," it made every aching muscle worth it. I didn't know much about raising a kid the right way. Never had a manual. Never had anyone showing me how to do it. My own father had been long gone before I even hit my teens. It was just me, guessing half the time, learning as I went. When Mason had colic and screamed for hours, I paced the floors of our little living room, singing off-key lullabies until he finally slept. When he got older and asked why his mom wasn't here like other kids' moms, I sat him down and told him the truth the only way I knew how, gentle and simple. "She loved you more than anything," I said once, rubbing his back as he blinked up at me with tearful eyes. "And she's watching you every day. You're her best thing." He believed me. And maybe, In some ways, that belief kept both of us going. Money was tight in those years. Real tight. There were days when I skipped dinner just to make sure Mason had enough on his plate. Nights when the electricity company threatened to shut us off. I learned how to stretch a dollar so far it could snap. Hand-me-down clothes, used toys from the thrift store, school supplies bought late when they were on clearance. But you know something funny? Mason never once complained. Not when he had to wear sneakers with duct tape on the toes. Not when Christmas meant just one present under the tree. Not when his friends had video games and new bikes and he made do with a football we patched up with shoe glue. Instead, he made me proud in ways I can't even explain. He worked hard at school. He was kind. He helped neighbors rake leaves and shovel snow without being asked. And every time he ran home, sweaty and muddy from playing outside, shouting "Dad," guess what? Like I was the only person in the world he wanted to tell, I knew we were doing just fine. We didn't have a big backyard, but we had enough space for a beat-up old grill and 2 lawn chairs. Every summer, I'd save up for a small camping trip, just me and Mason and a tent that leaked when it rained. We'd fish in muddy rivers, roast marshmallows until they caught fire, and tell ghost stories that made us both laugh too hard to be scared. Those weekends were messy, cheap, and perfect. One night, Mason must have been about 10. We lay under the stars, staring up at the sky. He rolled onto his side and looked at me with a seriousness that didn't match his missing front teeth. "Are we poor, Dad?" he asked. The question hit harder than any punch. I wanted to lie, wanted to tell him we were just like everyone else. But I didn't want to build our life on lies. I thought about it for a second, then said, "We don't have a lot of money, but we're rich in the stuff that matters." He frowned, confused. "Like what?" "Like love. Like laughs. Like always having someone who's got your back." He nodded thoughtfully, like he was storing that answer away somewhere deep inside him. Then he grinned, crooked and full of life. "Then we're the richest people ever." I laughed so hard that night I scared off half the wildlife in the woods. Time kept moving forward, faster than I liked. Mason grew taller, sharper, smarter. He never made me feel small for not knowing the things he was learning in school. Instead, he came home and patiently taught me about algebra, history, and science experiments that half the time ended with the kitchen smelling like burnt sugar. When he made it into college, full scholarship, no less. I stood in the driveway the day he left, pretending I wasn't wiping my eyes on my sleeve. He hugged me so tight my ribs ached. "I'll make you proud, Dad," he whispered. "You already have," I choked out. The house felt empty without him, but I kept busy. Fixed up an old motorcycle I'd been meaning to get running for years. Started volunteering at the local youth center, teaching kids how to work on engines. It felt good to give back a little, to pass on what I knew. Every Sunday, like clockwork, Mason would call. Sometimes from his dorm room, sometimes from the library, once from a rainy street corner because his umbrella broke and he wanted to tell me he aced his chemistry exam. No matter how busy he got, he never forgot where he came from. And then, years later, came the day he called me with shaking excitement in his voice. "Dad," he said, breathless, "I met someone. Claire." At first, I was just happy he was happy. She sounded nice, polite, sweet. Maybe a little polished around the edges, but love smooths out the rough spots, right? I didn't think much of it when Mason said her parents were a little formal. Thought maybe they'd warm up once they got to know us. I didn't realize then how much they saw people like me as invisible, as less than, as something to be tolerated at best and humiliated at worst. Maybe I should have seen it coming. But love has a way of making you believe in the best, even when the warning signs are flashing. Still, no matter what happened at that fancy wedding, no matter what bitter laughter tried to rewrite our story, it couldn't erase the life we built together. A life made of hard work and harder love. A life built with calloused hands, stubborn hearts, and the kind of bond that mockery couldn't even scratch. I sat back in my chair that night, listening to Mason's soft breathing through the thin walls of the house, and smiled. They thought they could measure a man by the clothes he wore or the school he graduated from. They had no idea how rich we really were. Growing up, Mason never made me feel like he was embarrassed of me. Not once. Even when the other kids bragged about what their parents did, lawyers, doctors, business owners, Mason would puff out his chest and tell anyone who listened, "My dad can fix anything." He said it like it was the most important job in the world. And to him, maybe it was. When he got older, I worried it would change. That teenage years and peer pressure would make him see the dirt under my nails or the grease stains on my jeans as something shameful. I braced myself for it, honestly. waiting for the day he'd stop inviting me to career days or start hesitating when people asked what his dad did for a living. But that day never came. Instead, I remember the time his high school held a career fair. Kids brought in their parents to talk about what they did. There were engineers and architects and professors with big titles and fancier words than I could follow. I almost told Mason he should pick someone else to stand beside him that day. I didn't want to embarrass him, but he wouldn't hear it. "You're coming, Dad," he said firmly. "You're the smartest man I know." So I went. Wore my best pair of jeans, a clean work shirt, even combed my hair back like Mason used to when he played dress-up as a kid. I stood next to him while he introduced me to his classmates and teachers. "This is my dad," he said, proud as anything. "He's a mechanic. He can fix cars, trucks, lawnmowers, anything with an engine. He even built a go-kart for me from scratch when I was 10. The kids' faces lit up. Some teachers smiled politely, but a few genuinely looked impressed when Mason told them about how we used scrap parts and still made that little go-kart run like a dream. Driving home that night, Mason leaned over and said, "Some dads wear suits, but mine can build things with his hands. That's way cooler." I don't think he realized what that meant to me. Maybe he never will. Even when he left for college, surrounded by kids from rich families with polished backgrounds, he never stopped being proud of where he came from. He'd send pictures of him in his dorm room, grinning like a fool, a poster of a classic Mustang behind him, a car we had rebuilt together one long, greasy summer. Once, during his second year, he brought a few friends home over break. I worried what they'd think of our small house, the cracked driveway, the second-hand furniture. But Mason acted like it was a palace. He showed them the workshop out back where we had spent countless weekends. Told them stories about learning to change oil before he learned to drive. He even pointed proudly at my old recliner in the living room and said, "Best chair in the world." Sat there every night listening to my dad's crazy stories. And when one of his friends joked about the tiny kitchen, Mason just laughed and said, "Yeah, but you've never had burgers better than my dad's." He made me feel like I was 10 feet tall. That's what love does. It doesn't hide you in the shadows. It shines a light on you, even when the rest of the world looks away. Claire entered his life not long after that. I could tell he was head over heels from the start. He talked about her like she was made of sunlight. She was smart, top of her class, working toward a career in international law. Mason couldn't stop grinning whenever he mentioned her. The first time we met, she was polite, a little stiff maybe, but kind enough. I chalked it up to nerves. Not everyone knows what to say to a man who makes his living elbow deep in engines. Her smile was tight, her words careful, like she was afraid to step in oil just by standing next to me. But Mason looked at her like she hung the moon, and that was enough for me. It wasn't until later, at family gatherings and dinners, that I noticed the small cracks. The way her parents would talk over me at the table, using words meant to confuse or belittle. The way Claire would sometimes wince when I mentioned work, like I had said something uncivilized. The way she introduced me to her friends once, not as Mason's dad, but as the man who fixed our car. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. Maybe I wasn't their kind of people. Maybe they just needed time. Maybe love could smooth it over the way it always had before. But now, looking back after what happened at the wedding, I realize love alone isn't always enough to bridge certain gaps, especially the kind built from pride and prejudice. I remember one particular conversation with Mason about 6 months before the wedding. We were fixing up the porch swing, replacing a few rotten boards. He was hammering away while I held the new slat steady. "You think Claire's parents like me?" he asked, out of nowhere. I shrugged, careful with my words. "They don't know you like I do. Give it time." He nodded, but the furrow between his eyebrows stayed. "Sometimes I think they see me as..." "I don't know. Not good enough," he muttered. "More to the nails than to me." I set down the slat and wiped my hands on my jeans. "Listen, son," I said carefully. "Some people are born thinking they're better than others because of where they went to school or how many zeros are on their paycheck. That's their problem, not yours. You measure a man by how he treats the people who can't do anything for him. By his heart, not his wallet." Mason didn't say anything for a long moment, just kept hammering. But his jaw was set, and I could tell he was storing those words away the same way he always did when something mattered. Maybe that's why, on the day of the wedding, when he saw that awful nameplate and heard the laughter, he didn't hesitate. He remembered what mattered. He chose love over appearances. He chose respect over status. He chose me, not because I was the perfect father, not because I had wealth or titles to offer, But because, when everything else was stripped away, money, education, fancy suits, and big houses, what was left was a bond built from years of late nights, early mornings, scraped knees, burned dinners, repaired engines, bedtime stories, and 1,000 little moments of showing up. And sometimes, that's more than enough. Sometimes, it's everything. The Whitmores were the kind of family that wore their pride like armor. Everything about them was polished, rehearsed, and just a little too perfect. From the first time I met them at a dinner party Claire's parents threw, I could feel the difference. They spoke in clipped, proper tones, like every word was a carefully measured performance. They shook hands too firmly, smiled too tightly, and when they talked about their achievements, degrees, investments, business ventures, it wasn't conversation. It was competition. I tried to fit in. God knows, I tried. I showed up in the best clothes I could afford, kept my elbows off the table, minded my manners the way Laura had once taught me. I smiled when they dropped fancy terms about stocks and private equity. I nodded politely when Dr. Whitmore bragged about the prestigious universities in their family line like it was a crown he wore. But no matter what I did, it wasn't enough. They didn't see me as a man who had raised a son through blood, sweat, and broken dreams. They didn't see the father who had stayed up for days to nurse a sick boy back to health, who had learned how to braid hair for school plays, who had taught a child how to ride a bike by running behind him for hours even though his legs screamed with pain. They didn't see love. They saw dirt under my nails and a high school dropout. They saw someone they couldn't parade in their cocktail parties or drop into conversations with their ivory tower friends. Still, I held my tongue. For Mason's sake. I smiled when they talked down to me, laughed when they made jokes that stung, and swallowed my pride like a bitter pill. Because Mason was happy. Because I believed, foolishly maybe, that marriage would build bridges where words had failed. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, there were signs. Small ones. Claire gently suggesting I get a new suit, something more appropriate for the venue. Judith Whitmore offering to arrange a speech coach if I wanted to say a few words at the reception, said with a syrupy sweetness that barely hid the insult. Dr. Whitmore sending me an etiquette book in the mail with a note. A little light reading before the big day. I could have gotten angry. Lord knows, a younger version of me might have thrown those words right back at them. But years of raising Mason had taught me patience. Taught me to pick my battles. I wasn't about to cause a scene and embarrass Mason at his own wedding. So, I tucked my hurt deep inside. I smiled through tight teeth. I told myself that one day, when Mason had a family of his own, when he held his own child in his arms, he'd understand that sometimes love meant swallowing your pride so your kids could have their day. I wore the new suit. Stiff and uncomfortable, it felt like a costume instead of clothing. I practiced my manners. I sat quietly through endless dinners where they discussed vacations I could never afford and schools I could never dream of entering. I endured it all. For Mason, the morning of the wedding, I woke early. Too early. I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window at the sunrise. I thought about Laura, how proud she would have been. I thought about the little boy who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares and how he was now a grown man about to start his own life. I told myself that the day would be about Mason, not about me, not about the Whitmores. I tucked my hands into the pockets of my new suit and whispered to the empty kitchen, "You did good, Laura. We did good." I drove to the venue with my heart in my throat. The ballroom was grander than I had imagined. Glittering chandeliers, gold-trimmed walls, music floating through the air like perfume. Guests in tuxedos and silk dresses floated around like it was some kind of royal ball. I felt like a bull that had wandered into a china shop. Still, I smiled. I shook hands. I let Judith kiss my cheek and pretended not to notice the way she immediately wiped her hand on her dress. I even laughed at Dr. Whitmore's jokes, even though every word dripped with condescension. Then came the moment that shattered it all. I walked to my assigned seat, trying to ignore the sideways glances, the whispers. When I bent down to read the nameplate on my chair, it felt like someone punched the air right out of my chest. Low-educated fake dad. I stared at it, blinking, hoping it would change if I looked long enough. But it didn't. The letters were crisp, deliberate, cruel. The laughter started softly. A titter here, a snicker there. Then it grew. Ugly. Mean. Judith covering her mouth with her hand, but failing to hide the sparkle in her eyes. Dr. Whitmore shaking his head in mock sympathy. I wanted to disappear. Wanted to sink into the marble floor and never be seen again. But before I could move, before the humiliation could finish crushing me, Mason's voice cut through the noise. Dad. I turned. He was standing at the altar, halfway to me, eyes blazing. Let's go home. Without hesitation, he crossed the room, took my arm, and together we walked out. Past the whispers, past the gasps, past the perfect people in their perfect clothes with their perfect lives. Claire didn't follow. Judith didn't call out. Dr. Whitmore didn't move. They let us go like we were the ones unworthy. Outside, the sun was blinding. Mason held the car door open for me like he had 100 times before when he was a boy pretending to be a chauffeur. I slid into the passenger seat, my heart too full to speak. He drove in silence for a while, hands tight on the steering wheel. I'm sorry, Dad, he said finally, voice rough. I should have seen it sooner. I shook my head. You saw it when it mattered. At a red light, he turned to me. I don't care about degrees or bank accounts or any of that crap. You're my father. You're my family. Tears burned my eyes, but I blinked them away. That day, I realized something important. Family isn't built in ballrooms or sealed with degrees. It's built in the trenches, one scraped knee, one missed meal, one whispered bedtime story at a time. They could keep their chandeliers and champagne. I had something they would never understand. I had my son's loyalty, and nothing in the world could make me richer than that. The morning after Mason's wedding, that wasn't. I woke up before the sun. I couldn't sleep, no matter how tired I was. My mind kept replaying everything from the night before. The mocking laughter, that awful nameplate, the heavy silence as we left the ballroom. I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee that had gone cold in my hands, staring out into the gray light of dawn. The world was still turning. Birds were singing. Somewhere across town, people were waking up to their ordinary lives. But for me, something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't angry, not exactly. I was past anger. What I felt now was something deeper, heavier. A sadness for the way people could twist love into something cruel. I wondered what would happen now. Mason hadn't said much after we got home last night. Just sat on the couch for a long time, staring at nothing. He finally fell asleep sitting up, head tilted against the wall like he had when he was a kid riding in the back seat after a long day. I didn't wake him. I just covered him with a blanket and sat nearby, keeping watch like I always had. I was sipping my second cup of coffee when I heard the rumble of an engine pulling up. I squinted down the driveway and saw Mason's old pickup rolling in, a little battered, a little dusty. It was Theo, his best friend since high school. Theo hopped out, still in his mechanic's uniform, and jogged up to the porch. You seen the news? He asked, panting like he had run the whole way. I frowned. News. Theo shoved his phone at me, the screen already lit up with headlines. Whitmo. I stared at it, unblinking. Below the headline was a photo of Claire's father, Dr. Whitmore, looking grim as reporters crowded around him. Another article headline flashed below it. Sources claim family fortune at risk as authorities move in. My first reaction wasn't joy. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was shock. Theo kept talking, excitement tumbling out of him. Someone leaked a bunch of documents last night, emails, bank statements, internal memos. It's everywhere. The SEC's involved. They're saying Whitmore Industries has been cooking their books for years. I set the phone down slowly. My heart was pounding, but my mind felt strangely calm. Was it karma? Was it justice? I didn't know. All I knew was that the very people who had laughed at me, who had called me a fake, who had tried to make me feel small, they were crumbling under the weight of their own lies. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Mason standing in the doorway, hair sticking up in all directions, blanket still wrapped around his shoulders. What's going on? He mumbled. I exchanged a look with Theo, then handed Mason the phone. He read the headlines, his eyes widening with every word. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared at the screen like it was written in a language he didn't understand. Then, slowly, he let out a breath and sank down onto the porch steps. I don't even know what to feel, he said finally. I sat down beside him. You don't have to feel anything right now. Just breathe. Theo clapped him on the shoulder. Better to find out now than later, man. Mason nodded, still staring off into the distance. I almost married into that mess. You didn't, I said quietly. You saw the truth when it mattered. We sat there in silence, the three of us, while the sun crept higher and the world around us started to buzz with life. I could hear the neighbors' sprinklers kicking on. Someone down the street was mowing their lawn. It was just another Saturday for most people. But for us, it was the first day of a different life. Around noon, Mason's phone started blowing up. Calls, texts, voicemails. Some were from Claire. Some were from her parents. Some were from people who had been at the wedding, desperate to know what we knew, if we had been part of the leak. Mason didn't answer a single one. He just sat there, staring at the phone, shaking his head. At one point, he turned to me and said, "Dad, do you think they ever loved me? Or was it always about appearances?" I hated that question. Hated that he even had to ask it. "I think they love the idea of you," I said carefully. "The image. The connection. But real love? Real love doesn't humiliate. It doesn't mock. It doesn't care about where you came from or what you wear or what you do for a living. It shows up when you fall. It holds on when things get ugly." Mason swallowed hard. "I don't think they ever really saw me. They didn't deserve to," I said simply. In the afternoon, the news got worse for the Whitmores. More documents surfaced. Anonymous sources came forward. Former employees spoke to the press. It was a tidal wave, and no matter how hard they tried to spin it, they were drowning. Theo eventually left to get back to work. Mason and I stayed on the porch, watching it all unfold from a battered old laptop he set up on the table between us. At one point, we saw a live clip of Dr. Whitmore being swarmed by reporters outside his office. His face was pale, drawn, nothing like the smug man who had smirked at me across the ballroom just a day before. Judith was there too, clutching her pearls like they could save her. Claire wasn't visible in the crowd. Maybe she was hiding. Maybe she was just smart enough to stay away. Mason watched for a few minutes, then closed the laptop with a sigh. "I don't want anything from them," he said. "Not their money. Not their apologies. Nothing." "You don't need anything from them," I said. "You've got everything you need right here." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw peace in his eyes. Maybe not happiness yet, but peace. That night, we grilled burgers in the backyard. Just the two of us. No fancy dishes. No white tablecloths. Just two plates balanced on our knees, ketchup dripping down our fingers, laughter filling the warm summer air. We didn't talk about the Whitmores. We didn't talk about the wedding. We just talked about life. About dreams. About the future. Mason told me he was thinking about starting his own business. Something simple, something honest. Maybe a garage of his own. Maybe teaching kids how to work on cars, the way I had taught him. I told him I thought that sounded just about perfect. As the stars came out overhead, I realized something important. The storm had passed, and even though the world had tried to tear us down, even though the laughter still echoed faintly in the back of my mind, it didn't matter anymore. We were still standing, still together, still undefeated. The next few days passed like a blur, but underneath it all, something kept pulling at me. A memory. A secret that I had tucked away so tightly even Mason didn't know about it. It started years ago, after Laura passed. Right around the time I won custody of Mason. I didn't have much, an old house, an older truck, a few $1,000s Laura's life insurance had left behind. It wasn't enough to live comfortably. Not by a long shot. But it was something. And I knew I had to make it count. One afternoon, when Mason was still in diapers, I walked into a community center that offered free financial advice for low-income families. I didn't know anything about stocks or investments. I barely understood savings accounts. But I sat through every workshop, read every battered pamphlet they handed me, and asked 1,000 questions. I wanted to be ready for anything life threw at us. It was there I learned about investing small amounts into companies. Not big flashy gambling. Smart, patient investing. Little by little, year after year. And funny enough, one of the companies I had put a small chunk of Laura's insurance money into was Whitmore Industries. Back then, they weren't the giant they became later. Just another mid-sized manufacturing company. Their stock was cheap, their prospects decent. I figured why not? It wasn't a fortune, just a few $100s here and there. Enough that, over the years, as Whitmore Industries grew into a giant, so did my shares. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was hiding it, but because it didn't seem important. It was just a quiet thing I did in the background, like fixing the leaky faucet or making sure Mason had enough money for school books. By the time Mason went to college, I had accumulated a surprising number of shares, enough to be considered what they called a minor silent investor. Not enough to sit on their board or throw weight around, but enough that when I sold them, someone would notice. I hadn't touched those shares in years. They just sat there, quietly growing, like a tree planted in a forgotten field, until the night of the wedding. When I saw that nameplate, when I heard the laughter, something in me snapped. Not in anger, not in revenge. In clarity. The people who sat there, mocking me, thought I was nothing. They didn't know I owned a small part of the empire they bragged about. They didn't know that with one phone call, I could make their comfortable little world tilt sideways. So I did. I waited until Mason and I got home, waited until he had fallen asleep on the couch, blanket pulled up to his chin like he was a boy again. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, pulled out the old laptop I barely used anymore, and logged into my investment account. There they were, hundreds of shares. Enough to matter. I didn't hesitate. I clicked sell. I didn't just sell them to the market. I directed them to a competitor I had researched months earlier, a company that had been waiting for the right moment to strike. The transfer went through in less than 20 minutes. By morning, it would be done, and I would be free of them. I didn't do it to destroy them. Honestly, that wasn't even my first thought. I did it because I realized I didn't owe them anything. Not my silence. Not my respect. Not my investment in their future. They had already decided what I was worth. They forgot to check who was holding part of their house up. The next morning, the fallout began. News outlets sniffed out the sale quickly. Speculation ran wild. People panicked. Stocks plummeted. Investigations kicked up dust the Whitmores had spent years trying to sweep under expensive rugs. It was chaos. Beautiful, ugly chaos. And all the while, I said nothing. Mason didn't know. No one did. It was my quiet goodbye to people who never deserved a hello. I watched it all unfold with a strange calm. No gloating. No fist pumping. Just the same steady feeling I had whenever I finished fixing an engine. Satisfaction that the work was done, that the gears had turned the way they were supposed to. One night, a few days after the collapse started, Mason and I sat on the porch again. We hadn't said much about the Whitmores lately. It was like we had both agreed, without speaking, to let the past stay where it was. But that night, Mason turned to me with a frown. "You ever feel bad?" he asked. "That they're losing everything?" I thought about it for a long minute. "No," I said finally, "because what they built was hollow. It was built on lies, on hurting people smaller than them. It was always going to fall. They just didn't think it would happen so soon." Mason nodded, staring out at the stars. "You think Claire knew?" he asked after a while. I shrugged. "Maybe. Maybe not. Doesn't change anything." He sat quietly, shoulders hunched like he was carrying something heavy. I reached over and clapped a hand on his back. "You don't owe them anything, Mason," I said. "Not your guilt. Not your regret. Sometimes, when a house catches fire, it's not your job to run back inside." He let out a shaky breath. I wanted it to be real, you know? The love, the family, all of it. "I know, son," I said softly. "And it will be. One day. With someone who doesn't need to measure your worth before they decide to love you." We sat in silence after that. Comfortable. Steady. Like two stones in a river, weathered but unmovable. Inside the house, the old clock ticked on. The world turned. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were exactly where we were supposed to be. A week later, I officially closed my investment account. Sold off the rest of the small pieces I'd gathered over the years. I didn't need them anymore. Didn't need the security blanket. We had something better. We had each other. And we had freedom. Sometimes, it's the unseen hands that shape the world the most. The ones nobody notices. The ones the rich and powerful laugh at, dismiss, or forget. Until those hands quietly let go. And everything they thought was unshakable starts to fall. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their apology. I didn't even need them to know it was me. The only thing I needed was already sitting beside me on that porch. A son who had chosen me. And a life that no amount of money could ever replace. Life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. After everything that happened. The wedding disaster, the collapse of Whitmore Industries, the endless stream of news articles painting Claire's family in a new, uglier light, I thought Mason might be broken for a long time. Thought he might wall himself off, become hard and bitter like some men do after betrayal. But that's not the kind of man Mason was raised to be. Slowly, like the first stubborn buds pushing through frozen soil, he started to heal. It began with small things. He got up early again, started fixing things around the house without being asked, changed the oil in the truck, painted the porch railing. Little tasks that might have seemed meaningless to someone else, but meant the world to me. They meant he was choosing life over anger, movement over bitterness. One morning, I found him sitting at the kitchen table with a pile of notebooks and a laptop spread out in front of him. "What's all this?" I asked, pouring myself a coffee. He looked up, his eyes brighter than I'd seen them in weeks. I'm thinking about starting my own garage, Dad. I blinked. Your own business? He nodded. Not just repairs. Teaching too. Classes for high school kids who want to learn a trade. Apprenticeships. Real work with real skills. Pride surged so fast in my chest it almost knocked me over. That's a damn good idea, son, I said, smiling so wide my cheeks hurt. He grinned back, a little sheepishly. Figured it was about time I started building something real. Something that matters. Over the next few weeks, Mason threw himself into planning. He found an old building on the edge of town, an abandoned mechanic's shop with cracked windows and a roof that needed fixing. It was a mess, but it had good bones, just like Mason. Strong, steady, built to last. I helped him every step of the way. We patched drywall, replaced broken tiles, cleaned out years of dust and grime. Some nights we worked until midnight, covered in paint and sweat, laughing about how sore we'd be in the morning. But there was joy in the work, a kind of sacred satisfaction that money couldn't buy. And somewhere along the way, something even better happened. Mason met Leah. It wasn't some grand movie moment with fireworks and slow motion running across a field. It was simpler than that. Realer. She worked at the hardware store where Mason and I made what felt like 100 trips every week. Short woman, big brown eyes, calluses on her hands from working the floor. No makeup, no airs. Just a bright laugh and a way of talking that made you feel like you mattered. I saw it happen almost in slow motion. One afternoon, Mason was arguing with the clerk about the difference between two brands of sealant when Leah stepped in, patiently explained the difference, and gave Mason a smile that turned him into a stammering fool. That night, he couldn't stop talking about her. She's smart, Dad, he said, practically glowing. She knows more about tools than I do. I just smiled and said, sounds like you finally met your match. It didn't take long. A few coffee dates turned into dinners. Dinners turned into long walks through the park. Long walks turned into nights when Mason came home humming under his breath like a man with a brand new song in his heart. He brought her over to dinner a month later. I made my famous burgers on the grill, and we ate out back under the stars. Leah fit right in, laughing at our terrible jokes, teasing Mason about how he still couldn't remember the difference between a Phillips and a flathead screwdriver. But what struck me most was how she looked at him. Not like he was some prize to be won. Not like he was a stepping stone to a better life. She looked at him like he was already enough. And for a man who had spent too many months questioning his worth, that look was everything. Later that night, after Leah had gone home and Mason and I were cleaning up, he turned to me, shy and serious. I think she's the one, Dad. I clapped a hand on his shoulder. You'll know. When the time's right, you'll know. And he did. 3 months later, Mason proposed. Nothing fancy. No flash mobs or choreographed dances. Just a quiet evening in the little shop he was still fixing up, kneeling on one dusty knee with a simple ring and a heart full of hope. Leah said yes before he even finished the question. The wedding was a small affair. Backyard, under the old oak tree that Mason used to climb as a boy. Close friends, a few neighbors, Theo as the best man. No fancy nameplates. No marble halls. No one cared about degrees or income brackets. All that mattered was the laughter that filled the air and the tears that filled my eyes as I watched my son marry a woman who saw him for everything he was and nothing he wasn't. When they exchanged vows, Mason didn't talk about wealth or appearances. He talked about loyalty, about late nights fixing broken things together, about love built through work and patience and stubborn hope. When it was over and Mason and Leah danced barefoot in the grass, I sat back in a lawn chair, a cold beer in my hand, and felt a peace deeper than any I'd ever known. We had come full circle. From a courtroom where I fought to keep my son, to a ballroom where they tried to laugh me away, to a backyard where real love finally stood tall and proud. Later that night, Mason found me sitting on the porch steps, watching the stars. He dropped down beside me, still in his wedding clothes, tie loose, hair a mess from all the dancing. Thanks for everything, Dad, he said quietly. You did this yourself, son? I replied. You built this life. You chose it. He shook his head. I wouldn't have known how to choose it if you hadn't shown me first. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Just sat there, shoulder to shoulder, the night wrapping around us like a blanket. And I realized something. The battles I had fought, the humiliation, the sacrifices, the loneliness, they had all been worth it. Every scraped knuckle, every sleepless night, every whispered prayer when I didn't know how we were going to make it. Because they led to this. To a son who knew what real love looked like. and a life richer than any fortune could buy. Sometimes I sit on the porch in the evenings, a cold drink in my hand, watching the sunset bleed across the sky. I rock slowly in my old chair, the wood creaking under my weight, and I think about the life I built, not with bricks or blueprints, but with hands that stayed steady when the storms came. I watch Mason through the open window, inside the house he helped rebuild with Leah. Their twins, Lily and Jack, tumble across the living room floor, a blur of giggles and tiny socked feet. Leah chases them, laughing breathlessly, while Mason pretends to be a growling bear, crawling after them on all fours. Their home is simple, like mine always was. No grand chandeliers, no marble floors. Just a place built with love, patched with patience, and filled with a laughter so real it hums in your bones. Every so often, Mason glances out the window at me, grins, and waves. I wave back, feeling something settle deep inside me, something stronger than pride, deeper than satisfaction. Peace. Years ago, when Claire's family tried to shame me at that wedding, I thought maybe they had stolen something from me. Maybe they had left a mark that would never heal. But now, looking at the life Mason and Leah have made, I realize the truth. They didn't steal anything. They only revealed what had been strong all along. Family isn't measured by titles, or wealth, or the kind of degrees you hang on the wall. It's measured by who shows up, who stays, who loves you when loving you isn't fashionable. It's measured by scraped knees kissed better, by broken hearts patiently mended, by old trucks kept running longer than they should. It's measured by two tired hands that built a life out of nothing but grit and a whole lot of stubborn hope. I lean back in the chair and close my eyes for a moment, letting the evening breeze brush against my face. I think about Laura, about the promises we made when we were young and reckless and thought we had all the time in the world. I like to believe she's still watching, somewhere beyond the clouds, smiling at the life we carved out of heartbreak and hard days. I imagine her sitting beside me now, laughing that soft laugh she always had, reaching over to squeeze my. You both did good. Sometimes Mason comes out after the kids are in bed, carrying 2 beers. He'll sit beside me, stretching his long legs out in front of him, and we'll talk about nothing and everything. About how Jack thinks he's a dinosaur, about how Lily refuses to go to sleep unless she hears 3 bedtime stories in a row, about how scary it is to raise kids, to wonder if you're doing it right, to worry you're making mistakes you can't see yet. I get scared sometimes, Dad, he admitted once, staring up at the stars. Scared I'll mess it all up. I chuckled low in my throat, took a slow sip of my drink, and said, "Welcome to being a parent." He laughed, shaking his head. "But you made it look easy." I turned to look at him then, at the strong, kind man he had become. "It wasn't easy," I said. "Not for a single minute. I just loved you enough to make it through." That's the secret no one tells you about family, about life. It's not about getting everything right. It's not about never falling down. It's about getting back up. Every single time. About showing up even when you're tired, even when you're scared, even when you don't have a clue what you're doing. It's about loving so hard that all the broken pieces start to fit together in new ways. And sitting there beside my son, under a sky full of stars, I realized something else. The Whitmores had laughed at me once, called me a low-educated fake dad, tried to paint me as less than. But none of that mattered anymore. Because while their empire crumbled, while their carefully constructed lives unraveled in headlines and courtrooms, my life was here, alive, breathing, growing stronger every day. Not perfect, not polished, but real. Mason built his garage up from the ground. It's a small place with grease-stained floors and a giant hand-painted sign that reads, "Cooper's Garage. Honest work, honest people." Every day, kids from the high school come by after classes to learn how to fix engines, change oil, patch tires. Mason teaches them with the same patience I once taught him. Leah runs the front office, twins strapped to her hips more often than not, managing invoices and ordering parts with a baby on each arm. Sometimes when I visit, the kids call me Mr. Cooper or Coach and ask me to show them tricks on old carburetors. I teach them everything I know, just like I did with Mason. Watching them grin with grease on their faces, I realized that somehow, without even planning it, we built something bigger than just a life. We built a legacy. A place where kids who felt overlooked could find pride in their hands, in their skills, in the knowledge that they mattered. And Mason, he stands at the heart of it all. Not because of a fancy name. Not because of a silver spoon. Because he knows what real value looks like. Because he was raised on it. One night, after a long day at the shop, Mason found me again on the porch. He sat down beside me without a word, handed me a cold beer, and stared out at the field stretching under the moonlight. After a while, he spoke. "Thanks for fighting for me, Dad. For everything." I clinked my bottle against his and said, "Always." Because that's what real fathers do. They show up. They stay. They love even when it's hard, when it's messy, when the world tells them they're not enough. They prove the world wrong, not with speeches or money or shiny things, but with the simple, stubborn act of being there. And tonight, as I sit here rocking under the wide-open sky, I know that no matter what the world tried to say about me, I was never a fake father. I was never low anything. I was a real man, a real father. And I had built a life that no laughter, no cruelty, no nameplate could ever erase. At my wife's birthday dinner, the screen displayed impotent, failure, high school dropout, low income, now single. Laughter erupted. My wife grinned. "Don't laugh too much. He might cry." My wife's mother sipped her wine. Her father chuckled. "Just a joke, right?" I took out my phone. "Begin." The room went silent. You know that feeling when you're sitting in a room full of people, but you might as well be invisible? That's been my life for the past 5 years. My name is Marcus Grant, and if you saw me walking down the street in Brooklyn, you'd probably forget my face before I even turned the corner. Average height, average build, average everything. Or at least that's what everyone thinks. I work as a general office administrator at a mid-sized accounting firm in downtown Brooklyn. Nothing glamorous about it. I push papers, schedule meetings, make sure the coffee machine's stocked, and keep the office running smooth. Most days, I'm the guy people walk past without a second glance. The invisible man in the khakis and button-down shirt who shows up at 9, eats lunch at his desk, and heads home by 6. My coworkers are decent enough. They'll say morning when they grab their coffee, maybe ask about my weekend if we're stuck in the elevator together. But I'm not the guy they invite out for drinks after work. I'm not the one they're gossiping with by the water cooler. I'm just Marcus. Reliable, quiet Marcus who never causes any drama and always gets his work done on time. That's exactly how my wife Celia sees me too. Actually, scratch that. She doesn't really see me at all. To her, I'm like that piece of furniture you keep meaning to replace, but just haven't gotten around to yet. Functional, but nothing you'd brag about to your friends. I'm the guy who picks up her dry cleaning, remembers to pay the bills, and never complains when she changes our dinner plans last minute because something better came up. We met 6 years ago at a coffee shop in Park Slope. She was arguing with the barista about her latte, something about the foam not being right, and I stepped in to smooth things over. Paid for her drink, made a little joke that actually got her to smile. She was gorgeous, way out of my league, and I couldn't believe it when she gave me her number. Looking back now, I wonder if she was just impressed that someone was willing to clean up her messes without expecting anything in return. The first year was good, really good. She made me feel like I mattered, like I was worth something. But somewhere along the way, that changed. Maybe it happened gradually, or maybe I was just too blind to see it coming. She started making these little comments. Nothing too harsh, just enough to sting. "Oh, Marcus is fine with whatever we decide. Don't worry about Marcus. He's not really into that kind of thing. Marcus is more of a practical choice." Her parents made it crystal clear from day one that I wasn't what they had in mind for their precious daughter. Warren Montgomery. Yeah, that's her maiden name. Montgomery is some hotshot investment banker who probably makes more in a month than I do in 3 years. Drives a BMW, wears suits that cost more than my rent, and has this way of looking at me like I'm something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. Lorraine, Celia's mom, is even worse. She's got that fake sweet smile down to an art form, the kind that says bless your heart, but really means you poor, pathetic thing. She'll ask about my little job and nod along like she's interested, but I can see it in her eyes. I'm temporary. A placeholder until Celia comes to her senses and finds someone more suitable. The worst part? They don't even try to hide it anymore. During family dinners, they'll talk about Celia's future like I'm not even sitting right there. When you finally settle down with the right person, once you're ready for a real relationship, they've got this whole fantasy mapped out where I just disappear one day, and Celia magically ends up with some lawyer or doctor who went to the right schools and belongs to the right country club. And Celia? She just sits there and lets it happen. Never stands up for me. Never tells them to back off. Sometimes I catch her nodding along, like she's already mentally planning her exit strategy. Like I'm just this inconvenient chapter she has to get through before her real life begins. I've tried talking to her about it. Tried explaining how it feels to be treated like I don't matter, like I'm just killing time until someone better comes along. But she always brushes it off. They don't mean anything by it, Marcus. You're being too sensitive. That's just how my family is. So I learned to keep my mouth shut, smile and nod during family gatherings, laugh along when her friends make jokes about us being such an unlikely couple, pretend it doesn't bother me when she introduces me as just my husband Marcus, like I'm some afterthought she picked up at the grocery store. But here's the thing about being invisible. People forget you're listening. They forget you're paying attention. They get comfortable saying things they probably shouldn't, doing things they think no one will notice. And after 5 years of being treated like furniture, I've heard and seen a lot. You want to know what really gets me? It's not even the disrespect anymore. I've gotten used to that. It's the assumption that I'm too weak, too stupid, or too pathetic to do anything about it. Like I'm just going to sit here forever, taking whatever scraps of affection they throw my way, grateful for the privilege of being tolerated. They think they know me. They think they've got me all figured out. But there's a lot they don't know about quiet, unremarkable Marcus Grant. And pretty soon, they're going to find out just how wrong they've been. Celia's 30th birthday is coming up, and her parents are throwing her this huge party. All the important people will be there. Her colleagues, her friends, her family's social circle. Everyone who matters. Everyone except me, apparently. I'm just expected to show up, smile pretty, and try not to embarrass anyone. But I've got other plans for that night. Plans they'd never see coming in a million years. Because sometimes the quiet ones are the ones you should worry about most. 3 weeks before Celia's 30th birthday, Warren cornered me in our kitchen during one of their family planning sessions. I was making coffee, because apparently that's what I do now, serve drinks while they decide how to spend money I'll never see, when he dropped the news. We're thinking the Sky Terrace at the Mandarin Oriental, he said, not even looking up from his phone. Lorraine's already talked to the event coordinator. It'll be perfect for what we have in mind. The Sky Terrace. I'd looked that place up once, just out of curiosity. $3,000 just to reserve the space, and that's before you even think about food, drinks, or decorations. Meanwhile, I'm clipping coupons and buying generic cereal. But hey, nothing's too good for Princess Celia's milestone birthday. Sounds expensive, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Warren finally looked at me, and I could practically see the dollar signs calculating behind his eyes. Don't worry about it, son, he said. And God, I hate when he calls me that. This is an investment in Celia's future. She deserves to be surrounded by the right kind of people on her special day. The right kind of people. Translation, not me. For the next 2 weeks, I watched them plan this thing like they were organizing a political campaign. Lorraine had spreadsheets, actual spreadsheets, with guest lists categorized by importance. There were the A-listers, city council members, successful entrepreneurs, old family friends with connections. Then the B-list, Celia's college friends who'd made something of themselves, co-workers from her marketing firm, distant relatives with money. I didn't even make the C-list. I was just Marcus, husband, with a question mark next to it, like they weren't sure I'd actually show up to my own wife's birthday party. The guest list kept growing. 200 people, then 250, then 300. I recognized maybe 30 names, and half of those were people who'd never bothered to learn mine. But Celia was in her element, calling everyone personally, posting teaser photos on Instagram, acting like this was going to be the social event of the century. You know what would be perfect? Lorraine said during one of their planning sessions. If Marcus wore navy instead of black. We don't want anyone mistaking him for the waitstaff. I was sitting right there in my own living room, and she's talking about me like I'm not even present. Celia just nodded along, already scrolling through her phone to find the perfect navy suit for her husband to wear so he wouldn't embarrass her family. Navy it is, I said, forcing a smile. Wouldn't want to cause any confusion. The suit shopping trip was its own special kind of hell. Celia dragged me to 3 different stores in Manhattan, each one more expensive than the last. She kept rejecting perfectly good suits because they weren't quite right or didn't send the right message. Finally, at the 4th store, she found something that met her standards. "This is perfect," she said, holding up a navy jacket that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. "Very appropriate." Appropriate. There's that word again. Not handsome, not stylish, not impressive. Appropriate. Like I'm a piece of furniture she needs to match the curtains. While she was busy planning the party of the century, I had my own preparations to make. See, Celia had already told me exactly what gift she wanted. A Hermes handbag she'd been subtly hinting about for months. Subtle like a freight train, but whatever. She'd sent me links, pictures, even the exact model number. The Birkin bag in a taupe color, whatever the hell that means. $42,000. For a purse. I spent 3 paychecks on that bag. Had to dip into my emergency fund, the money I'd been secretly saving for. Well, for emergencies. The sales associate at the Hermes store looked at me like I was trying to pay with Monopoly money when I handed over my credit card. But it went through, and I walked out of there with a little orange box that cost more than most people's cars. "She's going to love it," the saleswoman said with that practiced smile they reserve for customers who just made questionable financial decisions. Yeah, she probably would love it. For about 5 minutes, until she moved on to the next thing she needed. But I had my reasons for buying it. Reasons that went way beyond making my wife happy on her birthday. The week before the party, the invitations went out. Fancy cardstock with gold lettering, the whole 9 yards. "Warren and Lorraine Montgomery request the pleasure of your company." My name was nowhere on those invitations. Not even a mention that this was actually a joint celebration from both families. Just the Montgomerys, throwing a party for their daughter, with her husband as some unnamed +1. But I didn't come to this party empty-handed. And I'm not just talking about the overpriced purse sitting in my closet. I'd been making my own preparations, setting up my own little surprises for the big night. Because if they wanted to make this birthday memorable, well, I was going to make sure they got exactly what they asked for. The night before the party, I tried one last time. "Celia," I said, "are you sure about all this? I mean, do we really need such a big production?" She looked at me like I'd just suggested canceling Christmas. "Marcus, this is important to me. To my family. I need you to understand that." "I understand," I said. And I did. I understood perfectly. Tomorrow night, 300 of the right kind of people would gather on that rooftop terrace to celebrate my wife's birthday. They'd eat expensive food, drink top-shelf liquor, and toast to Celia's bright future with someone who isn't me. But they had no idea what kind of show they were really in for. The night of the party, I stood in front of our bedroom mirror adjusting that damn navy tie for the 10th time. The suit fit perfectly. Celia had made sure of that, but I felt like I was wearing a costume. Which, I guess, was exactly the point. Tonight, I was playing the role of the acceptable husband, dressed appropriately so nobody would mistake me for the help. "You ready?" Celia called from the bathroom, where she'd been getting ready for the past 2 hours. When she finally emerged, I had to admit she looked stunning. The gold dress caught the light just right. Her hair was pulled back in some fancy updo that probably cost more than most people's rent, and her makeup was flawless. She looked like she belonged on a magazine cover. "You look beautiful," I said, and I meant it. Whatever else was wrong between us, she was still gorgeous. She barely glanced at me. "Thanks. You look fine." Fine. Not good. Not handsome. Not even decent. Fine. Like I'd successfully managed not to embarrass her, which was apparently the highest compliment I could hope for. The ride to Manhattan was quiet. Celia spent the whole time checking her phone, responding to messages from people who were already at the party. I stared out the window at the city lights, that familiar knot in my stomach getting tighter with every mile. The sky terrace was everything Warren had promised and more. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the space, giving a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. The decor screamed money. White orchids everywhere, crystal chandeliers, tables set with china that probably cost more per plate than I made in a day. And the people. Jesus, the people. I recognized faces from the society pages, local politicians, business leaders. This wasn't just a birthday party. It was a networking event disguised as a celebration. "Marcus, Warren's voice boomed across the room as we walked in. He was already 3 drinks deep, his face flushed with alcohol and the joy of showing off. "There's my son-in-law. Come meet some people." For the next hour, I played my part perfectly. Smiled and nodded through introductions I'd forget by morning. Made small talk about the weather and the view. Laughed at jokes that weren't funny. And the whole time, I could feel the curious stares, hear the whispered conversations behind me. "That's Celia's husband. What does he do again? Something with paperwork, I think. Sweet girl, she could do so much better." By 9 o'clock, the champagne was flowing freely and the crowd was properly warmed up. That's when Warren clinked his glass and called for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice carrying easily across the terrace. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate our beautiful daughter's 30th birthday. Celia, sweetheart, come up here." Celia practically glowed as she made her way to the front of the room. The crowd applauded, and someone whistled appreciatively. She was in her element, surrounded by all the right people, being celebrated exactly the way she'd always dreamed. "Thank you all so much for being here," she said into the microphone Warren handed her. "This is honestly more than I could have ever hoped for. Having all of you here, all the people who matter most to me." I noticed she didn't look in my direction when she said that. "But before we get too sentimental," she continued with a laugh, "I thought we could have a little fun. I put together a slideshow of some memories over the years. Mom, could you get the lights?" The room dimmed, and a projector screen lowered from the ceiling. I found myself pushed to the back of the crowd as everyone gathered closer to watch. Which was fine by me. I'd seen enough of Celia's childhood photos to last a lifetime. The slideshow started innocently enough. Baby pictures that got the appropriate ahs from the crowd. Elementary school photos where she looked adorable in pigtails and missing teeth. Middle school awkwardness that everyone could relate to. High school glamour shots where you could already see the woman she'd become. Then came college. Sorority parties, spring break trips, graduation day with Warren and Lorraine beaming proudly. Study abroad in Italy where she looked tan and carefree, posing in front of ancient ruins and quaint cafes. Her first job at the marketing firm, professional headshots that screamed success and ambition. The crowd was eating it up, calling out memories and inside jokes. Celia was glowing, soaking up every moment of attention. This was her night, her celebration, her chance to show everyone exactly who she was and what she'd accomplished. "And now," she said, her voice taking on a playful tone that made my blood run cold, "let's talk about my current situation." That's when my photo appeared on the screen. A terrible candid shot she must have taken when I wasn't looking, where I looked tired and defeated. And underneath it, in giant block letters that everyone in the room could read clearly. Impotent. Failure. High school dropout. Low income. Now single. The laughter started immediately. Not polite chuckles or nervous giggles, but real, genuine laughter. People were pointing at the screen, at me, doubling over like this was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. I heard someone in the back yell, "Oh my God," and burst into fresh peals of laughter. I stood there, frozen in place, watching 300 people laugh at the most intimate, devastating lies about my life projected on a giant screen for everyone to see. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the laughter, but it wasn't shame I was feeling. It was clarity. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for without even knowing it. 5 years of small humiliations had led to this one perfect, crystallizing instant where everything became absolutely clear. Celia was still at the microphone, grinning at her audience like a stand-up comedian who'd just delivered the perfect punchline. "Don't laugh too much," she said. "He might cry." More laughter. Someone near me was wiping tears from their eyes. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady as I opened the app I'd prepared for exactly this moment. "Begin," I said quietly, too quietly for anyone to hear over the ongoing laughter. But they were about to hear a lot more from me. The laughter wasn't stopping. If anything, it was getting louder, more vicious. I watched faces I'd shaken hands with an hour earlier contort with amusement at my expense. These people, lawyers, politicians, business owners, the so-called pillars of society, were acting like teenagers who'd just seen someone slip and fall in the hallway. Margaret Chun, a city councilwoman I'd met during cocktail hour, was literally slapping her knee while pointing at the screen. "Oh honey," she called out to her husband, Look at this poor thing. Her husband, some real estate mogul whose name I couldn't remember, was wiping tears from his eyes. Jesus Christ, Celia, laughed David Morrison, one of Warren's golf buddies. Where'd you find this guy, a homeless shelter? That got another round of howls from the crowd. Even people I'd never seen before in my life were joining in, feeding off the energy like sharks smelling blood in the water. Social media phones were coming out now. I could see the camera flashes, people recording videos of the screen, of me standing there taking it all. Celia was eating it up. She stood at that microphone like she was hosting H. I know, she said, gesturing toward me with theatrical sympathy. I felt bad for him too, at first. But then I realized, someone has to take care of the strays, right? More laughter. Someone in the front row, I think it was one of her sorority sisters, shouted out, "Girl, you're a saint." The best part, Celia continued, really warming up now, is that he actually thinks this is a real marriage. Like, he puts on that little suit every morning and goes to his little job and comes home thinking he's a real husband. I looked around the room, taking in every face. The cruel delight in their expressions. The way they were looking at me like I was some kind of exotic animal in a zoo. These were supposed to be educated people, cultured people, the kind who donated to charity and went to opera galas and prided themselves on their sophistication. But put them in a pack, give them a target, and they turned into something else entirely. Warren was standing near the bar, scotch in hand, chuckling along with his buddies. Poor bastard, I heard him say to the man next to him. Probably doesn't even realize he's the help. Lorraine hadn't moved from her table, but she was smiling that cold smile of hers, sipping her wine like she was watching her favorite movie. Every so often she'd lean over to whisper something to the woman beside her, and they'd both glance at me and laugh. "Marcus, sweetie," Celia called out from the microphone, like she was addressing a child who'd wandered into the room by mistake. "Come up here. Don't be shy." The crowd turned to look at me expectantly, hundreds of eyes waiting to see what the pathetic husband would do next. Would I cry? Would I run? Would I just stand there and take it like the weakling they all thought I was? A few people started clapping, but it wasn't encouraging applause. It was the kind of slow, sarcastic clapping you'd give to someone who'd just failed spectacularly at something simple. Speech, someone called out, and others picked up the chant. I could feel the weight of every gaze in the room. All these successful, powerful people who'd come here tonight expecting entertainment, and boy, were they getting it. The loser husband, publicly humiliated by his beautiful wife, too pathetic to fight back, too broken to do anything but stand there and take it. My phone felt warm in my hand. 3 taps on the screen, that's all it would take. 3 taps to change everything. But first, I wanted to really look at them. I wanted to memorize this moment, these faces, this feeling. Because once I pressed that button, none of us would ever be the same. There was Jennifer Walsh, the lifestyle blogger who'd spent 20 minutes telling me about her authentic brand and how important it was to live your truth. She was recording the whole thing on her phone, probably already composing the caption for her Instagram story. There was Robert Kane, the investment advisor who'd given me his card earlier and told me to call if you ever want to get serious about your future. He was doubled over with laughter, his expensive toupee slightly askew. There was Dr. Patricia Vance, the therapist who'd written 3 books about emotional wellness and healthy relationships. She was applauding along with everyone else, as if publicly destroying someone's dignity was just good entertainment. These were Celia's people, her tribe, her chosen family. And this cruelty disguised as humor, this pack mentality, this complete lack of basic human decency. This was who she really was when she thought nobody was watching. Except somebody was watching. Lots of somebodies, actually. I looked back at Celia, still basking in the glow of the spotlight, still playing to her audience like the star of her own show. She caught my eye and winked, actually winked, like we were sharing some private joke instead of her systematically destroying what was left of my reputation in front of 300 strangers. That's when I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. I didn't just marry the wrong person. I married someone who genuinely enjoyed causing pain. Someone who got off on having power over others. Someone who saw kindness as weakness and cruelty as entertainment. And that's when I smiled. Not the fake, polite smile I'd been wearing for 5 years, but a real one. Because these people had no idea what they'd just done. They thought they were watching a lamb being led to slaughter. They were about to find out how wrong they were. I lifted my phone, opened the app, and said the word that would change everything. Begin. The first thing that happened was the screen went black. Just for a second, like someone had unplugged something. The laughter died down a bit as people looked around, wondering if there was a technical glitch. Celia tapped the microphone a couple times, that annoyed expression crossing her face that I knew so well. The one she got when things didn't go exactly according to her plan. "Is someone working on this?" she called out, shading her eyes against the spotlights as she looked toward the back of the room where the AV tech was supposed to be stationed. Then the screen flickered back to life. But instead of Celia's humiliating slideshow, there were new words scrolling across in bold white text. Live broadcast, the truth behind the smile. And underneath that, a number that made my heart race with satisfaction. 1,042,312 viewers and counting. The gasps started rippling through the crowd like a wave. People were pulling out their phones, frantically trying to figure out what was happening. I could hear confused murmurs, someone saying, "What the hell is this?" And another voice asking, "Is this some kind of joke?" But it wasn't a joke. This was 5 years of planning finally coming together. The comments section appeared at the bottom of the screen, messages from my YouTube livestream audience scrolling by faster than anyone could read them. But I caught a few. "Holy shit, is this really happening, Liv? Marcus, we're with you, brother. These people are about to get wrecked. 1 million viewers in the first minute. This is insane." Celia's face had gone from confused to panicked. She was squinting at the screen, trying to process what she was seeing. The crowd was getting restless now, that pack mentality shifting from cruel amusement to nervous uncertainty. That's when my face appeared on the giant screen behind her. Not the tired, defeated photo she'd used to humiliate me, but a professional headshot from my real work. Clean-shaven, confident, wearing a suit that actually fit properly. And above my image, the title that nobody in this room knew about. Marcus Grant, Real Talk Healing. Licensed Trauma Recovery Coach. Founder, Silent No More Foundation. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that massive space. 300 people, all staring at the screen like they couldn't quite process what they were seeing. "What is this?" Celia whispered into the microphone, her voice barely audible. She spun around to look at the screen, then back at me, then at the screen again. "Marcus, what?" "Let me explain," I said, and my voice carried perfectly across the room without any microphone at all. 5 years of public speaking experience will do that for you. You see, everyone here tonight thinks they know who Marcus Grant is. The quiet husband, the pushover, the guy who just takes whatever you dish out and says thank you. I started walking toward the front of the room, and the crowd parted in front of me like I was carrying something contagious. People were backing away, drinks forgotten, all eyes fixed on me as if I'd suddenly grown a second head. "But here's what you don't know," I continued, my voice steady and calm. "Marcus Grant isn't just some office drone who lucked into marrying above his station. Marcus Grant is the face behind Real Talk Healing, a YouTube channel with 2.3 million subscribers. People who've been watching my content for 3 years know me as the guy who helps men and women recognize emotional abuse and find their way out of toxic relationships." The comments on the screen were going crazy now. "Yes, Marcus, tell them. We've been waiting for this moment. Your story helped me leave my abusive ex. This is the best revenge ever." Celia's mouth was hanging open. She looked like someone had just told her that gravity had been canceled. That's not possible," she stammered. "You work at an accounting firm. You make $35,000 a year. You're nobody." I finished for her. "Yeah, that's what you thought. That's what I needed you to think. See, when you're documenting abuse for legal purposes, it helps if the abuser feels completely safe. If they think there's no way their victim could ever hurt them back." Warren was pushing through the crowd now, his face red with more than just alcohol. "This is ridiculous," he shouted. "Security, get this man out of here." But the security guards, all 3 of them, were standing perfectly still, looking more interested in what was happening than in stopping it. That's because I'd had a conversation with their supervisor earlier this week. Amazing what a decent tip and a simple request can accomplish. "The beautiful thing about running a channel focused on emotional abuse," I said, addressing the crowd like I was giving a TED Talk, "is that you develop a really good eye for recognizing the patterns. The gaslighting, the public humiliation, the systematic destruction of someone's self-worth. More comments were flooding the screen. This is therapeutic to watch. Celia is about to get exposed. Marcus has been playing 4D chess this whole time. I looked directly at Celia, who was still standing frozen at the microphone. You thought you married a loser, I said. Someone so pathetic and broken that you could treat him however you wanted with zero consequences. But what you actually married was someone who spent 5 years carefully documenting every cruel thing you and your family said and did. The crowd was dead silent now. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving, standing perfectly still with their trays as they watched this unfold. So let me introduce myself properly, I said, spreading my arms wide to address the entire room. My name is Marcus Grant. I hold a master's degree in psychology from Columbia University. I'm a licensed trauma recovery specialist. I've written 2 best-selling books about recognizing and escaping emotional abuse. My nonprofit foundation has helped over 10,000 people leave toxic relationships. And my annual income from speaking engagements, book sales, and online coaching. I paused, letting the tension build. Just shy of $500,000. The screen behind me erupted with celebration emojis and fire symbols as my audience realized what was happening. And in that moment, looking at 300 shocked faces staring back at me, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 5 years. Power. The power I felt in that moment was intoxicating, but I wasn't done. Not even close. You see, when you spend 5 years being treated like you're invisible, you pick up a lot of conversations that people think you can't hear. And when you're a trauma recovery specialist who understands the importance of documentation, you make sure those conversations are preserved. Now, I said, pulling my phone out again, I know what some of you are thinking. Maybe this is all just talk. Maybe I'm making this up to save face after being humiliated. So let me share some evidence with you. I tapped my screen, and the audio player interface appeared on the big screen behind me. The timestamp showed a date from 8 months ago. The location data showed our apartment in Brooklyn. This first recording, I announced to the room, was captured during one of Celia's regular phone calls with her mother. I was in the kitchen making dinner, as usual, and they were in the living room having what they thought was a private conversation. I hit play. Celia's voice filled the terrace, crystal clear through the premium sound system Warren had paid extra for. The irony wasn't lost on me. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, Mom. He's just so pathetic. Like, he actually thinks this is a real marriage. Lorraine's laugh was unmistakable, that cold, brittle sound I'd heard 1,000 times. Oh, sweetheart, you're doing the right thing. Think of it as community service. Someone has to take care of the strays. But seriously, Celia continued, he's just a stepping stone until I find someone better. Someone who actually matters. I mean, can you imagine introducing him to anyone important? Hi, meet Marcus. He files paperwork for a living. The crowd was dead silent now. All those faces that had been laughing 5 minutes ago were frozen, watching Celia like they'd never seen her before. Some people were actually backing away from her, like being associated with this conversation might somehow contaminate them. The worst part, Celia's voice continued from the speakers, is that he's actually grateful. Like, he thanks me for letting him take me to dinner. He thanks me for letting him buy me things. It's honestly disgusting how desperate he is. Well, Lorraine's voice replied, just make sure you don't get pregnant with him. You'd be stuck with that bloodline forever. Can you imagine? Both women laughed on the recording, and the sound echoed through the silent terrace like a gunshot. I looked directly at Celia, who had gone completely white. Her hands were shaking as she gripped the microphone stand. Remember that conversation? I asked her. You were planning our anniversary dinner at the time. I spent 2 weeks saving up to take you to that steakhouse you wanted to try. You thanked me afterward, told me what a wonderful husband I was. The comments on the screen were brutal. Celia is trash. How could anyone be this cruel? This woman is a sociopath. Marcus deserves so much better, but I wasn't finished. I loaded up the second audio file. This one, I said, is from a conversation between Warren and his golf buddies 3 months ago. They were in our living room having drinks while I was supposedly running errands for them. Warren's voice boomed through the speakers, slurred with expensive scotch. The boy's useful, I'll give him that. Picks up dry cleaning, handles all the boring husband duties, never complains about anything. Hell, he even pays for half the household expenses on his little salary. Male laughter in the background. But Jesus Christ, Warren continued. Watching him try to fit in with real men is like watching a chihuahua try to run with wolves. Celia knows she's slumming it. We all know she's slumming it. But hey, better to have a placeholder than be alone, right? Another voice, I recognized it as Robert Kane, the investment advisor, chimed in. How long you think she'll keep him around? Until something better comes along, Warren replied. Could be next month, could be next year. Depends on who she meets. But mark my words, the minute she finds a real man with real money and real prospects, little Marcus is getting his walking papers. More laughter, and then Warren's voice again. Let the boy keep thinking he matters. It's useful. He does all the work while she focuses on finding his replacement. I watched Warren's face as his own words played back to him. The confident, jovial expression had melted away, replaced by something between panic and rage. He was looking around the room like a trapped animal, probably trying to figure out how to spin this, how to control the narrative. But there was no controlling this. Not anymore. Useful, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. That's what I was to you people. Not a son-in-law, not a family member, not even a human being really. Just something useful. A tool you could use and discard when you found something better. The third audio file was already loaded. This one was going to hurt. And this last one, I said, my voice getting harder. This is the phone call that convinced me it was time to stop being useful. Celia's voice filled the space again. But this time, she was talking to someone else. Someone whose voice would be very familiar to Warren and Lorraine. Marco, baby, I miss you so much. The gasp that went through the crowd was audible. Marco Restrepo, Warren's business partner's son. The golden boy who'd been circling Celia like a shark for the past year. I know, Marco's voice replied. But you said you were handling the Marcus situation. I am. God, I can't wait to be done with this charade. The birthday party is going to be perfect. I'm going to humiliate him so badly in front of everyone that leaving him will look like mercy. People will actually feel sorry for me for having to put up with such a loser for so long. And then we can finally be together? The minute the divorce papers are signed. I already talked to Daddy's lawyer. We can have Marcus cleaned out and gone within a month. He'll probably thank me for putting him out of his misery. They both laughed, and the sound was like nails on a chalkboard. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the room, taking in every shocked face, every expression of disgust and disbelief. These people had come here tonight expecting to watch me get destroyed. Instead, they were watching the destruction of everything they thought they knew about the woman they'd been celebrating. The audio recordings had done their work. I could see it in their faces, the slow dawning realization that they'd been played, that the person they'd been laughing at was actually the one holding all the cards. But I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. See, the thing about being underestimated, I said, walking closer to the crowd, is that it gives you incredible freedom to work. While you all thought I was just some pathetic office clerk, I was actually building something you never saw coming. I gestured to the screen behind me, where my professional credentials were still displayed. Let me tell you what Marcus Grant has really been doing for the past 5 years while you all assumed he was filing paperwork and feeling grateful for scraps. The comments section was exploding with support messages, but I could also see that the viewer count had climbed to over 1.8 million people. This wasn't just going viral. This was becoming a cultural moment. First, I said, pointing to the screen, let's talk about education. You heard Warren earlier talking about his son-in-law, the high school dropout. Interesting story there. See, I did drop out of high school when I was 16 to take care of my dying mother. Worked 3 jobs to pay for her medical treatment until she passed when I was 18. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. But here's what Warren's detective skills missed. I got my GED, then my bachelor's degree in psychology from Brooklyn College, graduating summa cum laude. Then my master's degree from Columbia, you know, that little Ivy League school up in Manhattan. Graduated with a 3.9 GPA while working full-time to pay for it. I could see Celia's face in my peripheral vision. She looked like someone had just told her the laws of physics had been suspended. But wait, there's more. I continued, my voice dripping with the sarcasm I'd held back for 5 years. While I was playing the role of the grateful husband, I was also completing my certification as AT. The screen behind me switched to show my actual credentials. Diplomas, certificates, professional licenses, all bearing the name Marcus Daniel Grant. All legitimate, all impressive as hell. And that little office job? The one where I supposedly push papers around for 35 grand a year. I laughed, and the sound carried across the silent terrace. That's my day job, my cover story, my way of keeping a low profile while I built something real. I clicked to the next slide, showing screenshots of my YouTube channel analytics. The numbers were staggering. Millions of views, hundreds of thousands of subscribers, comments from people all over the world thanking me for helping them escape abusive relationships. Real Talk Healing isn't just a YouTube channel, I explained. It's a movement. Over 2 million subscribers who tune in every week to hear me talk about recognizing emotional abuse, building self-worth, and finding the strength to leave toxic relationships. Funny thing is, I've been using my own marriage as a case study for the past 3 years. You've all been my research subjects. Someone in the crowd, I think it was Margaret Chun, the city councilwoman, actually gasped out loud. You mean, all this time? All this time, I've been documenting every cruel comment, every dismissive look, every moment of psychological manipulation. Not just for legal purposes, though that was part of it, but for content. Do you have any idea how valuable real-time documentation of emotional abuse is to researchers and therapists? The comments on screen were incredible. Marcus just broke the internet. This man is a genius. Celia played herself so hard. I've been watching his channel for years. This is amazing. My book, I continued, Invisible Wounds, Recognizing Emotional Abuse in Plain Sight, hit the New York Times bestseller list 18 months ago. It's been translated into 12 languages. The follow-up, Breaking the Silence. A Survivor's Guide to Reclaiming Your Voice, came out 6 months ago and debuted at number 3. I looked directly at Warren, whose face had gone from red to a sickly pale color. That advance alone was more than your daughter's entire annual salary, Warren. But please, tell me more about how I don't matter. The screen switched again, showing the Silent No More Foundation's homepage. Photos of support groups, testimonials from survivors, statistics about the people we'd helped. The nonprofit I founded has chapters in 37 states now, I said. We've helped over 10,000 people leave abusive relationships. We provide legal aid, counseling services, temporary housing assistance, and job placement help, all funded by speaking fees that range from $25,000 to $50,000 per event. I could see people in the crowd pulling out their phones, frantically Googling my name, probably trying to verify what I was saying. Good luck with that. I'd been very careful to keep my public persona separate from my married life. Until tonight. And those speaking engagements? I smiled, really enjoying this part. Last month alone, I spoke at Harvard Medical School, the American Psychological Association's annual conference, and a corporate training event for Google. This month, I'm keynoting the International Conference on Domestic Violence Prevention in Geneva. Celia finally found her voice. This is impossible, she whispered into the microphone. You can't. I would have known. Would you? I asked. When exactly would you have found out, Celia? During all those deep, meaningful conversations we had about my hopes and dreams? Oh wait, we never had those, because you never asked. You never cared enough to ask. I gestured around the room. None of you did. You all just assumed that quiet Marcus with his little office job was exactly what he appeared to be. It never occurred to any of you that maybe, just maybe, someone who stays calm under pressure and observes everything might actually be intelligent. The viewer count was approaching 2 million now. This was bigger than anything I'd ever streamed before. So let me introduce some people who actually know who I am, I said, pointing to various spots around the room. Felix Martinez, my technical director, is sitting at table 12. He's the one who set up tonight's broadcast equipment. Wave hello, Felix. A young man in a server's uniform raised his hand and grinned. The crowd turned to stare at him like he was an alien. Leah Thompson, my business manager and the person who actually runs my foundation day-to-day, is over by the bar. She's been serving drinks all night and listening to you people trash talk her boss. A woman in catering attire stepped forward and gave a little mock curtsy. Several people near the bar actually backed away from her. And Jordan Walsh. Yeah, Jennifer, that's your ex-husband, is my attorney. He's been documenting everything that happened here tonight for the inevitable legal proceedings. A man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped out from behind one of the pillars, holding a tablet and stylus. Jennifer Walsh, the lifestyle blogger, Looked like she was going to faint. See, the thing about building a platform that helps abuse survivors, I said, is that you learn the importance of having a really, really good support team. I looked back at Celia, who was still frozen at the microphone like a deer in headlights. So tell me, sweetheart, I said, my voice carrying that cold edge I'd never let her hear before. How does it feel to find out you've been married to someone who actually matters? Celia's face had gone through about 15 different emotions in the past 10 minutes, but now she was settling on desperate defiance. She grabbed the microphone with both hands like it was a life preserver, her knuckles white against the black metal. This is all fake, she shouted, her voice cracking with hysteria. He's lying. He's making all of this up because he can't handle being exposed for what he really is. The crowd wasn't buying it anymore. I could see people exchanging glances, pulling up my website on their phones, probably finding my professional profiles that had been hidden in plain sight for years. The spell was broken, and they were starting to see her the way I'd seen her all along. Felix, I called out calmly, would you mind playing that last recording? The one from 2 days ago. Felix nodded from his position at table 12, and I heard him tap something on his phone. The screen behind Celia lit up with another audio interface, this one showing a timestamp from just 48 hours earlier. This is a phone conversation between my wife and Marco Restrepo, I announced to the room. Recorded 2 nights ago while I was supposedly working late at the office. Celia's eyes went wide with panic. No, don't. Marcus, please. But it was too late. Her voice filled the terrace again, sultry and intimate in a way she'd never spoken to me. Marco, baby, I can't wait for this to be over. The birthday party is going to be perfect. I'm going to humiliate him so completely that everyone will understand why I had to leave him. Marco's voice was smooth, confident. Are you sure about this plan? Seems kind of cruel, even for you. Celia laughed, that genuine laugh I rarely heard anymore. Trust me, it'll be hilarious. He'll probably start crying in front of everyone. And then I can play the long-suffering wife who finally reached her breaking point. People will actually feel sorry for me for having to put up with such a pathetic husband for so long. And after the party, I'll file for divorce on Monday. Daddy's lawyers already have the papers ready. Mental cruelty, irreconcilable differences, the whole package. We'll make sure he doesn't get a penny, and then you and I can finally stop sneaking around. What if he fights it? With what? He's got no money for a decent lawyer, no connections, no power. He'll sign whatever we put in front of him and disappear back to whatever hole he crawled out of. I give it 3 months before he's living in some studio apartment in Queens, crying into his ramen noodles. Both of them burst into laughter on the recording, and the sound echoed through the now silent terrace like a slap. I clicked stop and looked around the room. The transformation was complete. These people who'd been laughing at me 20 minutes ago were now looking at Celia like she was something toxic they'd accidentally stepped in. Warren was standing frozen by the bar, his scotch forgotten in his hand. Lorraine had actually covered her face with her napkin. Even Marco himself, who I could see trying to hide behind a pillar near the back, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. So there you have it, I said, addressing the crowd like a prosecutor giving closing arguments. The real Celia Montgomery Grant. Not the victim of a disappointing marriage, but the architect of 5 years of psychological torture. The woman who planned this entire evening as the grand finale of her campaign to destroy someone she thought was too weak to fight back. I pulled one more item from my jacket pocket, a manila envelope that had been delivered to my office that morning. Which brings me to this, I said, holding up the envelope. Divorce papers, filed this morning. Signed, sealed, and served, along with a restraining order and a lawsuit for intentional infliction of emotional distress. Celia's legs actually gave out. She grabbed the microphone stand to keep from falling, her mouth moving but no sound coming out. Oh, and Celia? I said, my voice carrying that cold satisfaction I'd been holding back for years. The prenup you made me sign? The one your daddy's lawyers thought was so clever? Turns out it's null and void when one party commits adultery and emotional abuse. My lawyers, the really expensive ones, made sure of that. The cracks in her perfect facade were spreading like a spider web across glass. And I was just getting started. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Within seconds of that final recording ending, I watched Celia's carefully constructed world start collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane. James Carter, The venture capitalist who'd been funding Celia's marketing startup was the first to move. He'd been standing near the front, checking his phone constantly throughout my little presentation. Now he was walking straight toward the exit, his face stone cold. "James, wait." Celia called out desperately, finally finding her voice. "Let me explain." He didn't even turn around. "My office will be in touch about dissolving our partnership," he said without breaking stride. Effective immediately. That was $300,000 in startup funding walking out the door, and everyone in the room knew it. The business connections, the professional network she'd spent years building, all of it was evaporating in real time. Maya Rodriguez, Celia's cousin who'd flown in from Chicago for the party, pushed through the crowd with tears streaming down her face. She walked straight up to where I was standing and grabbed my hands. "Marcus, I am so sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "I had no idea. If I had known what they were doing to you." She turned to glare at Celia. How could you? How could you be so cruel to someone who loved you?" Maya wasn't alone. I watched as person after person approached me. People who'd been laughing at that slideshow 15 minutes ago were now apologizing, offering support, asking if there was anything they could do. The social dynamics in the room had completely flipped. Meanwhile, two journalists I'd tipped off earlier in the week were making their way toward Warren and Lorraine. Sarah Chun from the New York Post and Marcus Williams from the Daily News, both specialists in covering high society scandals. I'd reached out to them yesterday, promising them a story they wouldn't want to miss. "Mr. Montgomery," Sarah called out, her recorder already running. "Care to comment on the allegations of emotional abuse we just heard? How does it feel to discover your investment banking clients might be interested in your family's treatment of vulnerable people?" Warren's face went from pale to purple. "No comment. This is a private family matter. Is it true you encouraged your daughter to commit adultery as part of a plan to defraud her husband in divorce proceedings?" Marcus Williams pressed, his photographer already snapping shots. Lorraine tried to make a run for it, but she was cornered by another group of people, former friends who were suddenly very interested in discussing her charity work. Turns out, when you're exposed as someone who enjoys psychological cruelty, people start wondering what else you might be capable of. The livestream viewer count had hit 2.8 million. My phone was buzzing non-stop with notifications, interview requests, speaking offers, messages from other abuse survivors sharing their own stories. This wasn't just going viral. It was becoming a movement. "Marcus." I turned to find Dr. Patricia Vance, the therapist who'd been laughing along with everyone else earlier. She looked sick to her stomach. "I need to apologize," she said quietly. "I've spent my entire career helping people recover from exactly this kind of abuse, and I sat there and laughed while it was happening right in front of me. I'm ashamed of myself." "You should be," I said simply. "But at least you're owning it now." Celia was still at the microphone, looking around desperately as her world crumbled. She tried to approach me several times, but Jordan, my attorney, stepped between us each time. "Mrs. Grant," he said formally, "I'm advising my client not to speak with you without legal representation present. Here's your copy of the restraining order." She stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "This isn't real." But it was real. 5 years of planning, 5 years of documentation, 5 years of building the platform and resources I'd need to fight back. It was all paying off in ways I'd never imagined. By midnight, the video had hit 4.3 million views. My email inbox was flooded with messages from survivors, supporters, journalists, and even a few celebrities who wanted to amplify the story. The hashtag #SilentNoMore was trending on 3 different social media platforms. Celia tried calling me 17 times that night. I let them all go to voicemail, then had Jordan save the recordings as evidence of harassment. The joke was over, and I was the one laughing now. 1 year later, I was sitting on a panel at the Palmer House Hilton in Chicago, looking out at an audience of 800 mental health professionals, survivors, and advocates. The banner behind me read, "Breaking the Silence, a national conference on emotional abuse recovery," and my name was listed right alongside some of the most respected researchers in the field. It's funny how much your perspective can change in 12 months. A year ago, I was Marcus Grant, the invisible husband who filed paperwork and kept his mouth shut. Today, I was Marcus Grant, the keynote speaker who'd turned his personal hell into a platform that was changing lives across the country. The topic of today's panel. I said into the microphone, my voice carrying easily across the packed ballroom, is healing in silence. When quiet strength becomes powerful voice. And I want to start by telling you something that might surprise you. I looked out at the sea of faces, therapists, social workers, survivors, advocates, people who'd driven hundreds of miles to be here. A year ago tonight, I was standing in front of 300 people who thought I was a joke. People who laughed while my wife publicly humiliated me, who saw my pain as entertainment. And you know what? In that moment, I realized something that changed everything. The room was completely silent, hanging on every word. I realized that being underestimated isn't always a weakness. Sometimes, it's the greatest gift you can get. Because while they were laughing at me, I was learning. While they were dismissing me, I was building. While they thought I was broken, I was becoming stronger than any of them could imagine. Scattered applause broke out, but I held up my hand. I wasn't done. See, that night, which most of you probably saw on YouTube, since it's been viewed over 47 million times now, that wasn't really about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice. It was about showing the world that quiet people aren't weak people, that invisible doesn't mean powerless, and that sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one who sees everything most clearly. I gestured to my left, where Leah Thompson was sitting in her role as the executive director of the Silent No More Foundation. She'd quit her old job 6 months ago to work with me full-time, and together we built something neither of us could have imagined. Leah, tell them about the numbers. She leaned forward to her microphone, grinning. In the past year, we've opened chapters in all 50 states. We've helped over 50,000 people leave abusive relationships. Our hotline takes more than 2,000 calls a week. And Marcus's books, both the original and the follow-up, have been translated into 23 languages and have sold over 2 million copies worldwide. The applause was louder this time, but I could see people in the audience wiping their eyes. These weren't just statistics to them. These were lives changed, people saved, voices finally heard. But here's what I'm most proud of, I continued, pulling up a slide on the screen behind me. It showed a photo from our most recent support group meeting. Dozens of people, all survivors of emotional abuse, all learning to rebuild their lives and reclaim their power. Every week, we get messages from people who watched that video and recognized themselves in my story. People who realized they weren't crazy, they weren't overreacting, they weren't alone. And they found the courage to say the word that changed my life, that started this whole journey. I paused, looking out at all those faces, thinking about how far I'd come from that night on the terrace when everything seemed hopeless. Begin, I said simply. That's all it takes. One word, one decision, one moment when you stop being silent and start being heard. Behind me, the giant screen displayed the same words I'd spoken softly into my phone that night, but now they meant something different. Not destruction, but creation. Not ending, but beginning. I used to be the joke, I said, my voice strong and clear. The punchline in someone else's story. The guy everyone felt sorry for, if they bothered to notice me at all. I stood up, spreading my arms to encompass the entire room. Now I'm the voice. The platform. The proof that no matter how small they try to make you feel, no matter how invisible they think you are, you have power. You have worth. And you have something they can never take away from you. I smiled, feeling that same clarity I'd felt a year ago. But this time it was warm instead of cold, healing instead of harsh. You have your story, and when you're ready, when you find the courage to stop being silent, that story can change everything. The standing ovation went on for 5 minutes. But more importantly, I could see it in their eyes, that spark of recognition, that moment of understanding. The silent were finding their voices. And I wasn't alone anymore.